is a saying that for every great fortune, there has been a great crime. So we didn't make a great fortune. We made a small fortune, which means we committed a small crime. So, but definitely, exposure and experiences make a person. The sooner you get exposed to different things and different people, the more impactful it is.
Circa 1949 or 50, Detroit might have been the H capital of the United States, at least according to congressional hearings and newspaper headlines. It's certainly the case that Detroit and New York were the first cities that had pipelines consistently coming in from Europe in the aftermath of World War II. And perhaps it's not a coincidence that the two featured interview subjects in Beyond Street Dreams, which we're finishing up, Courtney Brown, his family, and the Jackson family had many decades of a career in the heroin business in Detroit, and Cavario's family controlled a block, 116th and 7th, that is featured, and a couple blocks right around it, was literally featured in multiple stories by CBS, NBC in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s about it being the literal epicenter of the heroin business in the United States. And the heroin business was the first big drug business, and it's important because everything that came after cocaine, really, it was the same people that initially kind of controlled it and set it up. It was the same smuggling routes. It was the same methods of money laundering, the same methods of dealing, the same hitmen, the same kingpins, the same crooked cops and politicians. It was the same patterns that were created starting in the late 40s. I mean, the same sort of headlines and news you see in 1949, 50.
This has always been a neighborhood of vice. 20 years since 1941, the area here was a red light district. This block has also been used as a center for policy, which meant that there was the tie-up between the gang lords from Little Italy, which is half a dozen blocks away, and so that the police became, either through their cooperation with the gambling and the racketeers, have gotten in the custom of looking away.
And what's important to learn in this is that from the start, black neighborhoods in the big cities, Harlem chief amongst it, also places in Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, anywhere there was the colored part of town, to quote many addicts that were questioned in congressional hearings or very early on, like 1950, when heroin was starting to be a little bit of a problem. They would ask them, well, you know, how do you find where to buy drugs? If you go into a new town, like prostitutes, white prostitutes, or con women / prostitutes, they would be traveling the country. They'd say, well, how, if you arrive in a new city, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Detroit, you're on this circuit, how do you meet a new connection? And they would say, well, you just go to the colored section and you go to a bar and you make eye contact with somebody. So already by 1950, 49, 51, the black part of town has been made into, and when I say made into, I mean the black people that were there, they're fresh up from the country, or they've been in the city a few years. They're certainly not in 1950 bringing anything in from overseas. So if their part of town is where you can meet people to buy drugs, well, it's because somebody else put them there. In the case of Detroit, again, you have a guy known as the Old Man, Giuseppe Catalanate, was called in congressional hearings in 1949 America's dope king. And then, of course, New York had it as well. And the Little Italy in New York, the original biggest Little Italy in the country, which is now called Spanish Harlem, which is we call East Harlem, which is just, so if you're at 116th and Lenox, or 7th, where Cavario and his family was at, when you cross 5th Avenue, which is just 2 or 3 blocks to the east, you're in East Harlem, aka Italian Harlem, which is what it was called way back in the day. And there's a little street that runs a couple blocks, Pleasant Avenue. And you have to understand about this part of Harlem, this is all just a few blocks. The entirety of Harlem only had 251 street corners or 250,000 people. So this is a lot of people in a small area. Pleasant Avenue, the Italians had all the heroin, and they just sent it a couple blocks over. And that's why Black Harlem was probably the epicenter of the heroin business, because the people that were bringing it all into the country starting in the mid-50s on, after they kind of replaced Detroit as the #1 area, they were a couple blocks away. And so it's no coincidence.
You know, white folks are always talking about the crime in Harlem. What about the crime in Harlem?
What do you expect for it to be in Harlem? Sure, it's going to be crime in Harlem. The policeman don't try to stop the crime. He adds to the crime when he accepts the money from people in graft.
Thank you.
If he would do his job, it would be less crime. But Harlem is a place that's being exploited by everybody, not only by the policeman, by the bondsman, by the lawyer, and everybody else. More of the Negroes' dollars go to lawyers, bondsmen, and policemen than any other source. They pay more dollars to them than they do for food. You just look at the court building and see who all's down there. Just go into the jails and see who all in there.
There is a silent, undeclared war between 117th Street and the police. There has been since long before the Harlem riots. The police, for their part, know this block is a center for street sales of narcotics. Addicts come here even from other parts of New York to await their connection and buy their fix. The police say 117th is a fairly bad street. 117th says the police take money to look away from narcotics, gambling, and petty crime.
As a youngster on 17th Street, I saw prostitution, dope peddling, number racketeers, every vice you can think of. Because young men, 18, 17, 20, went downtown looking for jobs with high school diplomas, $35 a week, fellows with college degrees at $75 a week, which is wrong. So they stooped to the next lowest thing, the quick dollar. $150 a week, pushing numbers, selling dope. Fast dollar, something to take care of a family.
Why couldn't they get jobs?
Because the white man downtown said they weren't qualified.
Believe it or not, the people I was around, they was like, Junior, just to slow down. Wasn't no big moral, there was no moral judgment of it.
No, because they came, our people came on the era, the heroin era. Even before that, the alcohol era. The alcohol was very bad.
Of the most prominent features of our behavior that distinguished us from our parents was the fact that in 1950, when drugs began to pour into Harlem, we went to drugs. We used drugs. We got high off heroin. We nodded, but we were cool. We didn't do like our parents had been doing since the plantation days, getting drunk on Saturday night and going around cutting each other up, hitting each other in the head with axes and meat cleavers and shooting each other. All we did, we got high and we nodded and we became lost in our own selves.
Alcohol was the only drug up until recently that I knew of that made a person behave outside of who they actually were. Yeah. Alcohol changed them, and not
a friendly guy will turn into a mean drunk. Right. So that'd be like, wow, you was a nice guy until you got drunk.
Ain't nothing like a mean drunk, bro. Nothing like a mean drunk. The problem is that we didn't come from enough normalcy in most cases to be able to fall back into something where we can actually regroup.
Yes.
We came from some very destructive and downtrodden super dysfunctional backgrounds. And when we came up within that. So we coming up within that is gaining access to excessive degrees of resources. And now you're able to do things within that situation that other people within that situation are not commonly able to do.